right after Amber speaks, we're going to have our natural history panel. So without further ado, Amber, lead physical therapist from Casimir. Go ahead. All right, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. As Brandon mentioned, my name is Amber Sapp. I'm a physical therapist with Casimir, and some of you, I think, are familiar with our video assessments. I know many of you are capturing those, and so we're really grateful for that. The other hat that I wear is I'm also a mom of a child with a rare disease called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. These are my kids. I've got to show you my kids. Isn't that what all good moms do? My daughter is Charlotte. She's 14, and my son is Garrett. He just turned 16. And I'll tell you just a quick preview of what Duchenne is. I've already told you it's a rare disease. There's no cure, much like VCP disease. It affects muscles. It's this progressive sort of loss of muscle. It also includes the cardiac muscle and all the muscles that support breathing. And he was diagnosed at 3 years old, which is pretty early, but having a mom who's a physical therapist, has goods and bads, so you recognize those things early, but you also see, where the disease is headed, and so that's a bit of a burden itself. So I think if you look at the Duchenne landscape currently, it has a lot of promise. And I did a quick search on clinicaltrials.gov while I was sitting at the airport. And in trials right now that are either enrolling or are currently have participants, there are 79, which seems like a lot, but that wasn't always the case. So 12 years ago, when he was diagnosed, there was virtually nothing on the horizon. In fact, his neurologist that we met with to confirm the diagnosis literally said to us, "Take him home and love him. There's nothing you can do." And that wasn't good enough. So the first thing we did, outside of getting a new neurologist, was turn our eyes toward clinical trials. So over the past 12 years, he's been a part of several clinical trials. The one in particular I'm going to talk to you about lasted about 2.5 years. And he was about 7 or 8 years old at the time. And what we learned throughout the study is that he was actually in a placebo-controlled arm for a year. A year's a long time when you don't have a lot of time to begin with. The primary outcome for his trial was the 4-stair climb. And it failed to meet its endpoint, much like many of the other trials in Duchenne. And I put the second picture up here because it explains a lot about our family. We tend to use humor as a coping mechanism. And in this picture, you can see my son is just full of mischief. And he has called in the child life specialists, and they asked him, do you want us to bring you some Play-Doh? No, he wanted red paint. And so he painted the IV site. He dripped red paint down his arm. There was drops of red paint on the bed, and he says, "Give me that call button." And so he calls the nurse, and of course, what can I help you with? And he says, "I think I'm having a reaction. Come check it out." So all the nurses come running, and it's his most favorite experience from this trial. And it's not the first time he did this. So the second endpoint that failed was the North Star. So this is a list of almost 30 failed trials in Duchenne since his diagnosis. All of these failed to meet their primary endpoints. Some had some adverse events that were related to them, but mostly it was failed endpoints. And I show you this slide not to discourage you from participating, but really to acknowledge the contribution that families like mine gave into finding some sort of treatment for Duchenne. I feel like the least we can do is to learn from this. So it started some families like mine wondering, did all of these trials fail because the drug doesn't work? Or were we maybe not measuring the right things? And I think what Nathan and Allison are doing is really, really crucial groundwork. As you don't have any trials in clinic right now, it's really important to find out what are the endpoints that we need to look at to determine if there is improvement. And I feel like we've beat the natural history horse to death here, so I won't go into details here. except this last one a little bit, to identify or develop outcome measures that are specific to the condition we're looking at. And I love that Megan used this same picture. I love this cartoon because it's so impactful. We can kind of understand that not all outcome measures are created equal, but they are necessary for sound research, and many of them have a lot of efficacy behind them. They also can help us to provide really unbiased look at if an intervention is improving our situation. You guys have seen a lot of these. These are common ones that are currently in use. They all measure something a little bit different, but they're all very complementary to one another in some way. So while my son Garrett was a part of a clinical trial, my friend Mindy, who is the president of Casimir, her son Aiden was in another trial across the country. In the face of these 30 clinical trials that had failed, Mindy knew that she wanted to learn definitively, was her son's drug working? Or are we going to have another failed trial because we didn't really measure the right things? So Mindy started taking videos of Aiden performing some tasks around the house, things like getting up from the floor, getting up from sitting on the couch. And she began to notice some improvements while he was on this drug that the current outcome measures were not picking up on. Hopefully these videos will play. Here she's asked him to stand up from supine, which is just lying on his back, 3 months into the drug. And so a pretty common thing that we see in Duchenne is this thing called the Gowers maneuver, where the boys will push up on their thighs to stand up because they've lost trunk and glute strength. He does that here. She filmed him again a month later doing the same task. In the first video, he sort of does this bit where he kind of circles his trunk around to stand up. And in the second video, he's not doing that. He kind of pops straight up. And it just got her thinking, something's going on. And she kind of described this as he's shedding some compensations that he had. He still can do the task, but she noticed that he wasn't compensating in the same ways as he did in the first video. So when Aiden's trial also failed because it didn't meet its primary outcome, Mindy took her collection of videos, along with some other families who had also collected videos of their boys, to the FDA. They presented them, and because of these videos they collected, it actually aided in the accelerated approval of the first drug in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So this video series is her son Aiden, who was in middle school at the time, and one of the things that was really meaningful to him was his getting in and out of the car at school. So he's in car line. He was so embarrassed that he couldn't do it on his own. So that was the one thing he wanted her to video to see if he was getting improvement on. So this is when he began the study. And he's super frustrated, and he grabs his hair even. He can't perform the task. A few months in, I think 5 months in, he can get in, albeit a little bit of struggles. 7 months in on drug. And look at his little face. Like, he's just so pleased with himself. I love that. She also took these videos to her insurance company when they denied the drug after it was approved, and without anything, no rebuttal whatsoever, they approved his drug. They covered the drug, so which is pretty amazing. So based on this, the FDA had given Mindy some guidelines and suggested, hey, we really think you have something here, but we need you to quantify it in a way. So we call video captures typically qualitative movement, the quality of how people move. And the FDA really urged us to turn that into quantitative. So I think of quantitative as by the numbers. We need some numbers to support what we're looking at. So we developed scorecards to measure compensation in how patients with Duchenne move. We worked with some expert physical therapists and clinicians around the country to help us develop what is known as the Duchenne Video Assessment now. So I'm going to show you some videos from another drug that these were captured by some really brave families whose drug had also failed to meet its endpoint, and they agreed to capture videos of their boys coming off of drug. So they'd been receiving drug. The trial ended, and they agreed, let's watch them decline. I mean, imagine how difficult that is. So what we see here I think it's playing on loop. You can see we're watching kind of the compensations he makes. He performs the task. You can see it's about 4 seconds. I timed it out. So in forced air climb, 4 seconds is kind of where he would measure in the clinic. But you can see his first step, he does this kind of step 2 pattern, and then the subsequent steps are step over step. He also uses one hand to hold the handrail. So we can quantify that on the scorecards we developed. I know it's kind of small to see, but some of the things on the scorecard, I don't even know if I can see them, that alternate step over step pattern, use of one hand on the handrail, wide base of support, those are all things that we're kind of looking at. Here's the second time point that his family captured for us. He no longer can use that step 2 pattern even on one step. He's step over step, or step 2 pattern on every step. He's now hand on the handrail, and he's pushing off of his thigh. So he's gone from 56% severity, which is how we rate that, to now 67% severity. But if you time him out on a forced stair climb, he's still 4 seconds. So there's no difference. So if the primary outcome was the forced stair climb, it looks as if he's not even declined. So the Duchenne video assessment was sort of birthed out of all of these interactions with families, all these videos that we collected. It's an at-home video assessment, and I know many of you are a part of that. It captures participants in their natural environment. It's designed to measure ease of movement by counting the compensations that a participant adopts just to maintain their independence. We selected tasks that were meaningful to patients and families through multiple conversations with stakeholders in the community. And it's really data that can't be captured in a clinic. So some of our assessments are things like putting a t-shirt on and taking it off, or eating 10 bites, getting in and out of bed. I love this aspect is that it decreases the travel and clinic fatigue. Having been a part of clinical trials with my own son, we traveled once a month, 6 hours from home. We would get in at midnight. There's a time change because it's in a different state, and he has to be in the clinic at 7 a.m. And I knew his performance on those assessments was not how he was performing at home, but that was the only option we were given. These measurements actually do complement some of those in-clinic measures. As Megan was saying, like, you can't always control everything at home. You need some of these in-clinic measures, but the idea behind the Duchenne video assessment is that we're getting it a little more granular, some of the things that patients are describing that we haven't been able to measure in a clinic. So this is a list of our tasks in the DVA. And they range from ambulatory tasks to non-ambulatory tasks based on a person's abilities. And they really encompass, like climb 5 stairs would be some of our higher function participants, down to reaching across the table to grab a cell phone. And that seems like a kind of an odd task, but when we ask 20-something-year-old men, what's important to you, being able to reach across the table, not just pull the cell phone toward them, but turn it over so mom's not reading the text over their shoulder. It's these little things that we wanted to be able to capture. And I think what's really important is that you recognize that they're both ends of the spectrum here. So when you're capturing your videos at home, it's so important that even if you're only able to capture one video because your function has declined, it's so important that we can see that so we can get this kind of full picture of the natural history. So I'm going to show you a couple of videos. This is Mindy's son performing some tasks. This task is stand up from the couch. And so some of the things we're looking at are him pushing up off of the couch, or off of his legs, and how he uses his trunk to stand up. If we score him out in a North Star, he's 1, meaning he has compensated movements. But on our scorecard, we can score him out at about 50% severe. And the second time point, it is similar, but you can see he struggles more, and he uses kind of his neck and trunk to pull himself up, and it's definitely different than the other time point, and yet they both score out the same on a North Star. This task is sit up from lying on the floor. he uses his hands to sort of walk up along the floor. He scores out about 82% severe. 6 months later, very similar, except now you can see the strain happening on his head and neck as he uses that to help lift him. So we consider 100% severe is that a participant can no longer perform a certain task. So you can see he's declined from 82 to 91. This is actually a video from our source material study. And in order to do that, we had about 70 participants. We captured videos every 30 weeks. Some captured videos over 12 weeks, just to really get a full picture to do our validation work. It's hard for me to see this from this angle. But this kiddo, you can see that he uses, he uses hands and feet to stand up, but he doesn't quite push up off of his legs yet. And he doesn't really strain his trunk either when he's standing. And this is his 30 weeks later. So he's now walking his hands along the floor, pushing up off of his thighs. And his base of support is wider. So he goes from 25% severe to 63% severe. So many of you know that we're collecting these similar videos in VCP, and I really am grateful for your participation. But we do have some work to do. So first we have to determine if the tasks that we selected in Duchenne are applicable to VCP. And the videos that we're collecting are helping us to determine that. Are we meeting that? Are we at that ceiling effect? Are these tasks too easy? Do we need to find something that's more, maybe a little bit more challenging? Are we capturing the low end of disease progression? It's important to capture that entire spectrum. We also want to look at the capture techniques. I know that I've heard from a few of you, why are there so many specifics on how we capture these videos? Why do we have to lay the tape marks out so that we measure specifically 10 feet here and 6 feet there? And why is that important? It's so we can make comparisons from each time point to each time point. And so the other thing we're determining is, do those same measurements that we use in our manuals for Duchenne, do those still apply to VCP, or do we need to edit those a little bit to make, we're dealing with a taller population. Does our measurement from the camera need to be further than it is in the kids? Those are all things that we're sort of looking at. Do the scorecards that we have still apply? And that's something that I've been tasked with. I've started going through the videos. I've seen many of your videos already. I can tell you that some of the criteria are perfectly applicable. Some of the compensations that we see in Duchenne are very similar. But there are some levels that are kind of, in between levels that I think, oh gosh, I wish I could score them, in this way, but it's not on our Duchenne scorecard. Those are the things we want to look at and kind of work out and make this really applicable to VCP. And then, are we sensitive to change over time? One of the things that we're doing for the DVA right now is determining longitudinal validation. We've done validation work over the short term, but now our next step is longitudinal validation. So really, over the past 5 years, we have done a lot of work to get to where we are. And we're on the path toward full FDA qualification, which is unheard of in Duchenne. This will be the Duchenne Video Assessment will be the first fully qualified outcome measure in Duchenne. And it's really our desire to find out the truth. Does a drug work? If it doesn't work, that's one thing. But if it works and we're discarding it because we're not measuring the right things, that's what we don't want for you. We don't want 30 failed studies in VCP. So we know what it takes to do the work, and we're really thrilled to share our knowledge with your community. So I'm going to share one last slide with you. Do you guys get the Facebook memories that pop up from year to year? So I had this one recently that came up, and it was the anniversary of when we found out our son's clinical trial was ended because it did not meet its primary outcome. And it says, hope is not a denial of reality, but it's not also some kind of spiritual elixir. It's not a placebo infused out of nowhere. Hope is a series of small actions that transform darkness into light. It's putting one foot in front of the other when we can find no reason to do so at all. Thank you.